I never missed a payment for 40 years. Then they told me my pension was frozen and promised to help, made me sign a...
The courtroom is usually a place of noise, a place where excuses fly like dust in the wind. But today, it is unnaturally quiet. When Judge Boyd enters, he doesn't look at the lawyers, he doesn't look at the audience. His eyes, sharp as a surgeon's blade, fixate on the man sitting at the defendant's table. This isn't just another eviction case. This is a battleground where the past is about to collide with a very dark present. The man sitting there is Mr. Elias Thorne. He is 72 years old. His back is straight, a habit formed by 30 years of military service, but his hands are trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. Beside him, there is no expensive attorney, only a stack of weathered papers and a faded photograph of a woman who is no longer here. On the other side sits a representative of a massive real estate conglomerate, wearing a suit that costs more than Elias's annual pension. Judge Boyd takes a seat. He doesn't start with a gavel. He starts with a silence that feels like an interrogation. He opens the folder. Case number 4092, Landmark Property Holdings versus Elias Thorne. Subject: non-payment of rent for 12 consecutive months and immediate eviction. Boyd's voice is devoid of warmth. It is the sound of pure, cold logic. He looks up, his gaze locking onto the corporate lawyer. You are asking this court to put a decorated veteran on the street in the middle of winter. Give me the facts, not the emotions. The lawyer stands up, smirking with a confidence that feels predatory. Your Honor, the facts are simple. Mr. Thorne has failed to pay his rent. We have sent multiple notices. We have offered relocation assistance, which he refused. The law is clear. Property rights are absolute. We cannot maintain a business if tenants decide they no longer need to pay their debts. Judge Boyd turns his head slowly toward Elias. The atmosphere shifts. This is the moment where most people expect a plea for mercy. They expect Elias to cry, to talk about his service, to beg for more time. But Boyd isn't looking for tears. He is looking for the logic that doesn't fit. Mr. Thorne, Boyd says, his voice low and steady. The records show you have lived in that apartment for 40 years. You have never missed a payment until exactly 14 months ago. People don't just stop being responsible after 4 decades without a reason. You claim you have no pension, but my records indicate you were a master sergeant with full benefits. Where is the money, Elias? Elias stands up. His voice is raspy, but it carries the ghost of authority. Your Honor, I was told my pension was frozen due to an administrative error. I went to the bank. I went to the Veterans Affairs office. Every door I knocked on was locked. Then, this company bought my building. They told me they would help me fix the pension issue if I signed a temporary management agreement. I signed it. 2 weeks later, my bank account was drained, and the eviction notice arrived. The corporate lawyer jumps in. Objection. Your Honor, this is hearsay and irrelevant to the non-payment of rent. There is no evidence of such an agreement. Judge Boyd raises a single hand. The lawyer stops instantly. The silence returns, heavier than before. Boyd leans forward. He isn't looking at the papers anymore. He is looking through them. Logic tells me, Boyd begins, that master sergeants do not suddenly forget how to manage their lives. Logic tells me that a billion-dollar company does not take a personal interest in a tenant's pension unless there is something much bigger at play. He stares at the lawyer. You say there is no evidence of an agreement? That is interesting, because I'm looking at your company's digital filing history, and I see a ghost. I see a file that was deleted 10 minutes before this session began. The lawyer's face pales. The smirk vanishes. Elias looks confused, but Boyd's eyes are glowing with a cold, predatory intelligence. The conspiracy has just started to bleed. The courtroom feels colder, not because of the weather outside, but because the mask of the predator is beginning to crack under Boyd's gaze. Sit down, counsel, Boyd whispers. I am just getting started with you. The silence in the courtroom is no longer empty. It is heavy, vibrating with the sudden shift in power. Judge Boyd remains motionless, his hands folded on the bench like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. He doesn't look at the pale lawyer. He looks at the digital monitor, displaying the server logs of Landmark Property Holdings. Counsel, Boyd says, his voice cutting through the air like a winter wind. In my courtroom, technology is not a hiding place. It is a witness that never lies. Explain to me why your company's internal server recorded a manual override on Mr. Thorne's tenant file at 4:15 this morning. The lawyer stammers, clutching his leather briefcase as if it could protect him. Your Honor, that must be a routine system update. We manage thousands of properties. It is statistically impossible to monitor every single file modification. Statistically impossible? Boyd repeats, a ghost of a cold smile appearing on his lips. Mathematics is the language of truth, and the math here tells a different story. The override was not global, it was surgical. It targeted one specific document, a Veterans Affairs direct deposit authorization form. Now, why would a real estate company need to access a tenant's private government banking authorization? Unless, of course, the goal wasn't just to collect rent, but to ensure the rent could never be paid. Elias Thorne leans forward, his weathered face etched with a sudden realization. That was the document they told me to sign, he whispers, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and shock. They said it was a loyalty discount form for seniors. They told me it would lower my monthly payments. I didn't have my glasses. I trusted them because the man who brought it was wearing a veteran's pin on his lapel. Judge Boyd's eyes darken. The cold logic he is famous for begins to reveal the heartbreaking conspiracy. He turns his gaze back to the corporate representative. You used a veteran's identity as a weapon against one of his own. You didn't just want his apartment. You wanted his pension to pay for the legal fees of his own eviction. That is not business, counsel. That is a calculated execution of a man's dignity. The lawyer tries to regain his footing, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to sound authoritative. This is pure speculation. Mr. Thorne signed those documents of his own free will. The law does not protect people from their own lack of diligence. The eviction stands on the basis of unpaid debt, regardless of how that debt came to be. We move for an immediate judgment. Boyd picks up his pen. He doesn't sign the judgment. Instead, he starts writing a name on a piece of paper. You want a judgment? I will give you a revelation. I have just authorized a deep forensic audit of your company's senior assistance division, and while we wait for the results, I'm calling a witness that your company forgot existed. A former clerk who was fired from your office 3 months ago for refusing to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding veteran tenants. The courtroom gasps. The lawyer drops his pen, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The conspiracy is no longer a secret. It is a bleeding wound. Boyd leans back, his face a mask of granite. The logic of greed always leaves a trail of crumbs, counsel, and you've left a whole loaf. This trial is no longer about an eviction. It is about a crime, and I am the one who will decide the sentence. The side door of the courtroom creaks open, and a young woman walks in. She is Sarah Miller, a former junior analyst at Landmark Property Holdings. She doesn't look like a revolutionary. She looks like someone who hasn't slept in weeks. Her presence is a physical blow to the corporate legal team. Judge Boyd watches her approach the witness stand, his eyes never leaving the corporate representative, who is now frantically typing on a laptop. Miss Miller, Boyd says, his voice as cold as a mountain stream. You were fired for a lack of cooperation. In my court, cooperation is a debt you owe to the truth. Tell us about the Legacy Project. Sarah takes a deep breath, her voice small but steady. The Legacy Project wasn't about property management, Your Honor. It was an algorithm. We were instructed to identify tenants who were veterans over the age of 70 with no immediate family in the state. The software didn't just track their rent, it tracked their cognitive health. It flagged Elias Thorne the moment he visited a clinic for early-stage memory concerns. A murmur of horror ripples through the room. Elias Thorne looks down at his hands, his face pale. Judge Boyd leans forward, the intensity of his gaze enough to make the air feel thick. Explain the mechanism, Miss Miller. How does a real estate company benefit from a veteran's medical records? Boyd asks, his logic digging deeper into the conspiracy. They used a shell company to buy the debt from the VA administration during an administrative transition, Sarah explains. Once they had the debt, they could legally freeze the pension payments. Then, they sent a veteran liaison to Mr. Thorne. They didn't offer help. They offered a signature. That signature gave them power of attorney over his federal benefits for 90 days. just long enough to clear his account and trigger the eviction. The corporate lawyer springs to his feet, screaming, "This is a fabrication by a disgruntled ex-employee. There is no paper trail. Mr. Thorne is a victim of his own confusion, not a conspiracy." He points a trembling finger at Sarah. "You are violating a dozen trade secret laws by being here." Judge Boyd picks up his gavel, but he doesn't use it. He simply taps it against his palm. The sound is like a heartbeat. "Counsel, you mentioned a paper trail. You are correct. Paper can be burned. But greed is loud, and digital footprints are permanent." Boyd turns the screen toward the lawyer. "While Miss Miller was speaking, I had the court's cybersecurity team bypass the deletion you attempted earlier. I am now looking at a direct wire transfer from Mr. Thorne's pension account to your firm's offshore retainer. It happened 3 minutes after he signed that loyalty form." The lawyer's mouth hangs open. No words come out. The logic of Judge Boyd has trapped them in a box of their own making. Boyd looks at Elias, his expression softening by a fraction of a degree, but his voice remains an instrument of justice. "Mr. Thorne, you thought you were losing your mind because you couldn't find the money. You weren't losing your mind. You were being robbed by a machine designed to be invisible." Boyd turns back to the corporate team, his face turning into a mask of absolute authority. "The eviction is stayed indefinitely, but we are no longer talking about a civil matter. I am now convening a grand jury in this very room. Miss Miller, stay where you are. Counsel, call your CEO. Tell him the legacy project just became his death warrant." The courtroom air is stagnant, the kind of stillness that precedes a massive collapse. Judge Boyd hasn't looked away from the corporate lawyer for 5 minutes. The lawyer is sweating through his expensive silk shirt, his eyes darting toward the exit. But there is no exit, not in Boyd's court. "You see, counsel," Boyd says, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I spent the last 10 minutes calculating the probability of a real estate firm accidentally acquiring veteran debt in 3 different states simultaneously. Do you know what the probability is? 0. Absolute 0. Boyd taps a key on his console, and a map of the United States flickers onto the large screen. Red dots begin to glow, appearing like small wounds across the Midwest and the East Coast. These dots represent evicted veterans under the management of Landmark Property Holdings. Every single one of them had a spotless record for 30 years. Every single one of them was over 70. And every single one of them mysteriously lost their pension access weeks before the eviction notices arrived." Elias Thorne stares at the screen, his mouth agape. "I'm not the only one," he whispers, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and fury. "You did this to others? To men I served with?" The realization hits him like a physical blow. He isn't just a victim of a bad landlord. He is a survivor of a systematic purge. The lawyer tries one last, desperate defense. "Your Honor, business is a cold game of efficiency. We bought distressed debt. We managed our assets. If the government failed to pay these men, that is a failure of the bureaucracy, not our board of directors. You cannot hold a private entity responsible for the flaws of the federal system." Judge Boyd stands up. It is a slow, deliberate movement that makes everyone in the room hold their breath. He leans over his bench, looming over the lawyer like a vengeful shadow. "The bureaucracy did not fail, counsel. You hacked the bureaucracy. You didn't buy distressed debt. You created it. You used internal contacts within the pension processing centers to flag these accounts. You bribed low-level clerks to create administrative errors that only your company could fix if the veterans signed your loyalty forms." Boyd's cold logic is now a devastating weapon. He pulls up a transcript of a recorded call between the lawyer and a hidden third party. "I have the audio, counsel. I have the recording of you discussing the liquidation of Elias Thorne's dignity. You called him an expendable asset. You said his apartment was worth more than his life because of the gentrification of the downtown district." The lawyer's knees buckle, and he literally falls back into his chair. The corporate mask has shattered completely, revealing the hollow, rotting core beneath. Judge Boyd looks at the court reporter. "Record this. I am issuing an immediate freeze on all assets held by Landmark Property Holdings within this jurisdiction. And I am notifying the Department of Justice. This isn't an eviction hearing anymore. This is an autopsy of a corporate corpse. Boyd turns back to Elias, his eyes reflecting a cold, hard respect. Mr. Thorne, they tried to make you invisible. They tried to make you a ghost in your own home. But they forgot one thing about men like you. You don't just go away. You hold the line, and today I am the line. Boyd's gavel stays silent, but the weight of his words feels like a final judgment. The conspiracy is no longer heartbreaking. It is being dismantled piece by piece. Judge Boyd leans back in his chair, but the movement offers no relief to those in the room. His eyes are fixed on a name he just highlighted on his private screen. Mr. Thorne, Boyd begins, his voice echoing with a clinical precision. When you were in the service, you were trained to spot an ambush. You were taught that an enemy doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes they wear a smile and a veteran's pin. Boyd looks back at the corporate table. Counsel, I've been looking into the recruitment profile of your veteran liaisons. You didn't hire social workers. You didn't hire housing experts. Every single person in that department has a background in predatory lending or psychological operations. The courtroom falls into a stunned silence. Boyd continues, his logic peeling back the final layers of the heartbreaking conspiracy. You targeted Elias Thorne because he was proud. You knew that a man like him would rather lose his home than admit he was confused by a bank statement. You counted on his silence. You banked on his dignity being his own cage. You didn't just steal his money, you weaponized his character against him. Elias Thorne stands up slowly, his eyes burning with a cold fire that matches the judge's. They called me a hero, he says, his voice low and dangerous. They sat in my kitchen, drank my coffee, and called me sir while they were signing my life away. The betrayal in his voice is palpable, a weight that hangs over the room like a shroud. Precisely, Boyd snaps, his gavel finally hitting the bench with a sound like a cracking bone. The logic of this crime is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of human value. You thought Elias Thorne was a distressed asset because he is old and alone. But in this courtroom, age is not weakness, it is evidence. And being alone does not mean you are unprotected. It means you are a singular focus of justice. Boyd turns his attention to a small, unassuming man sitting in the back row of the gallery, the regional director of Landmark Property Holdings, who thought he was invisible. Mr. Vance, I see you. I see the way you've been checking your watch every 30 seconds. Are you worried about a meeting? Or are you worried about the fact that your private encrypted messaging app just successfully finished its backup to the court's secure server? The man in the back row freezes. His face turns the color of ash. Judge Boyd's cold logic has just caught the real architect of the shadow. You thought you could hide behind a junior lawyer and a digital firewall, Boyd whispers, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. But I have spent 30 years learning how to find the rot in the foundation. And Mr. Vance, the foundation is currently collapsing directly on top of you. Boyd points his pen toward the bailiff. Secure Mr. Vance's electronic devices immediately. And counsel, if you even think about deleting another comma, I will have you in a holding cell before you can say objection. We are moving into the final phase of this liquidation, and I promise you, the price will be far higher than any rent Elias Thorne ever owed. The courtroom is now a theater of digital ghosts. Judge Boyd taps his screen, and a cascade of bank records begins to flow across the monitors like a waterfall of frozen numbers. Mr. Vance, Boyd says, his voice dropping into a register of absolute, terrifying calm. You built a business on the assumption that retired soldiers don't understand the blockchain. You thought that if you moved the money through enough shell companies, it would eventually become invisible. But you forgot one thing. Every dollar has a memory. Boyd points to a specific transaction, highlighted in a piercing neon blue. 13 months ago, Elias Thorne's pension was diverted to an account held by Apex Management Solutions. 3 days later, that account paid for the private jet that took your board of directors to a retreat in the Caymans. While Elias Thorne was eating canned soup to save money for a rent he couldn't pay, you were drinking vintage champagne paid for by his 30 years of service in the desert. A collective gasp fills the room. The heartbreaking conspiracy is no longer a theory, it is a ledger. Elias Thorne looks at the screen, then at Mr. Vance. The betrayal is so deep it transcends anger. It is a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. Judge Boyd's cold logic continues to carve through the defense. But here is where your logic failed you, Mr. Vance. You used the same encryption key for your private messages that you used for the company's internal ledger. It was a signature of your own arrogance. Boyd reads aloud from a decrypted message. Target Thorne is resisting the loyalty program. Increase the pressure, cut the power to his unit, make him feel his age. He'll sign by Friday. The room goes ice cold. People in the gallery are visibly shaking. This wasn't just a financial crime, it was psychological torture designed to break a man's spirit so he would hand over his legacy. You wanted to make him feel his age? Boyd whispers, standing up once more, his presence filling the bench like a tidal wave about to break. You wanted him to feel small and forgotten? Well, Mr. Thorne is no longer alone. He is the lead plaintiff in a class action suit I am initiating this very second. And your Apex Management Solutions is no longer a company. As of this moment, it is a crime scene. Mr. Vance tries to speak, his mouth moving, but no sound coming out. He looks like a man who has just realized he is standing on a trap door. Judge Boyd doesn't give him a second to recover. The logic of the predator is based on the idea that the weak are there to be consumed. But you made a mistake, Vance. You mistook kindness for weakness. You mistook a veteran's patience for senility. And now, you are going to learn exactly what happens when the system you tried to cheat decides to delete you instead. Boyd turns to the bailiff, his finger pointing directly at the man in the back row. Take Mr. Vance into custody. He is a flight risk. And quite frankly, his presence in this room is an insult to the flag Elias Thorne fought for. We are moving to the final stage of restitution. And Counsel Boyd looks at the trembling lawyer. Pray that I don't find your name on those encrypted messages, because if I do, you won't be practicing law anymore. You'll be practicing silence in a federal cell. The courtroom is no longer a place of judgment. It has become a place of surgical restoration. Judge Boyd remains standing, his shadow stretching across the bench like the hand of fate itself. Mr. Vance has been removed in handcuffs, and the corporate lawyers are sitting in a silence so profound it feels like a physical weight. Boyd looks down at Elias Thorne, who is still standing, his eyes fixed on the man who represented his ruin. Mr. Thorne, Boyd says, his voice losing its predatory edge and replacing it with a solemn, ironclad authority. In nature, when a predator fails, it becomes the sustenance for the environment it tried to destroy. The law is no different. Boyd taps a final sequence into his terminal. On the screen, the red dots representing the evicted veterans begin to turn green, one by one. Logic dictates that a debt built on a lie is not a debt at all. It is a theft. Therefore, I am not just staying your eviction. I am nullifying the very existence of Landmark Property Holdings as a legal entity in this state. Their assets are no longer theirs. They have been seized and placed into a specialized trust. The lead corporate lawyer tries to stand, his voice a pathetic squeak. Your Honor, due process. You can't just liquidate a corporation without. Boyd doesn't even look at him. Sit down, counsel. Due process was the right you forfeited when you targeted men who bled for this country. You used the Legacy Project to identify the vulnerable. Now, I am using the Restoration Project to identify the survivors. Every cent stolen from Mr. Thorne, including the interest, the legal fees, and the emotional damages, has already been transferred back into his primary account. I didn't wait for your permission. I used the same direct deposit authorization you forced him to sign. Elias Thorne's breath hitches. He checks his old flip phone, and a small beep confirms the notification. His eyes well up with tears, not of sadness, but of a man who has finally been seen. It's back, he whispers. Everything they took, it's back. Not everything, Boyd counters, his eyes flashing with a cold brilliance. They took your peace of mind. They took your sleep. They tried to take your honor. Money cannot buy those back, but justice can serve as a shield for the future. I have authorized a permanent injunction. Landmark Property Holdings and any subsidiary connected to Mr. Vance is barred for life from owning or managing any property within 50 miles of a veteran's residence. We are building a wall around men like you, Elias, a wall made of law. Boyd looks at the remaining corporate staff, his face a mask of absolute disdain. The cold logic you used to justify your greed told you that Elias Thorne was an old man with no power. My logic tells me he is a master sergeant of the United States Army. And in this courtroom, the rank of a veteran outweights the portfolio of a thief every single time. He looks at the court clerk, prepare the final restitution orders for the other 84 victims. We are going to empty their accounts until there isn't enough left for a postage stamp. The courtroom feels lighter, the suffocating tension replaced by a grim but satisfying sense of equilibrium. Boyd looks at Elias one last time, a brief, silent nod of respect passing between the judge and the soldier. Master Sergeant Thorne, you have held the line long enough. The court will take it from here. Go home. Your door is locked. And for the first time in 14 months, the key belongs only to you. The gavel finally rests on the bench, but its work is done. Judge Boyd stands, looking out over a courtroom that has been transformed from a site of predatory theft into a monument of accountability. The corporate team is gone, replaced by federal agents securing boxes of evidence. Elias Thorne remains in his seat, his shoulders no longer hunched, his eyes clear and focused. He looks like the soldier he was always meant to be. Boyd takes a breath, his voice carrying the weight of a final, unyielding truth. This court is adjourned, Boyd says, his tone steady and resonant, but the lesson of today is permanent. Boyd looks directly into the camera, addressing the unseen thousands who might be facing their own shadows. To those who believe that wealth is a shield for cruelty, you are wrong. Logic dictates that the more complex your lie, the more points of failure it possesses. You thought you were architects of a perfect system. You were actually just building your own prison, one stolen dollar at a time. He turns his gaze back to Elias. Master Sergeant Thorne, you didn't win today because of luck. You won because you refused to be silent. You won because you maintained your integrity when they tried to steal your identity. The law is a tool, but courage is the hand that wields it. Never let anyone tell you that you are expendable. In this country, the foundation is built on the backs of men like you, not the bank accounts of men like Vance. Boyd gathers his robes, a final, sharp movement of authority. Restitution has been made. The criminals are in cells, and the legacy project has been deleted from existence. But let this be a warning to any other entity watching these proceedings. I am always looking at the ledger. I am always decoding the motive. And I will always find the truth. Go in peace, Elias. The line has been held. Judge Boyd exits the bench with the same cold, calculated grace he entered with. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a single, distant gavel strike and the image of Elias Thorne walking out of the courtroom. A free man in every sense of the word. Justice wasn't just served, it was engineered.